Well, now that the Trojans have taken care of little brother, we can get on to the real rival. Thank you, UCLA, for doing what you do. Bruins being Bruins, talking a lot and then finding a way to lose the game when it most mattered. I appreciate that. I know we all do. And I probably don't say enough to you guys that I really do appreciate you and thank you for all you do for us. So good work. Thank you, DTR. I'm going to miss you. Here's the thing, though. I'm going to have to admit that I screwed up today. And I had promised that for Notre Dame week I was going to have some special guests. And I did, actually. I lined them up, two Notre Dame legends. I had an All-American defensive back, Luther Bradley, who is still Notre Dame's all-time leader in interceptions and a guy that I've known for 25 years. Great guy, despite the fact that he's a domer. I had Jerome Hevans, who when he finished at Notre Dame was Notre Dame's career rushing leader. He's still seventh on their all-time list. Both guys have won national championships. So last night, we got on Zoom. We had about an hour-long discussion. It was great. They were hilarious. We had a great time. It was fantastic. And I screwed up the recording. So that's out. Hopefully I'll bring those guys back at some point soon because I really would like you to hear from them. But instead, it's just me. We're going solo. And I want to talk a little bit about the Notre Dame rivalry. Because in my mind, this is the greatest rivalry in college football. And I know fans all across the country are going to argue that their rivalry is the best, and everybody has a rival. And when I say the best in college football, I don't mean the one where there's the most bad blood. There are a lot of rivals that hate each other. Kansas and Missouri hate each other. I don't think anybody cares. I think Oregon and Oregon State hate each other, but for 90% of those two programs' histories, they've both been absolutely terrible, so that doesn't really matter. To be the best rivalry in college football, it has to be between two elite programs. So you back up and you look at what the top programs are of all time. Look, the top six are pretty easy. You got Notre Dame, USC, Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Michigan. Those are your top six. People may dispute the order of those, but those are your top six programs of all time. And then you've got Texas and Nebraska and some others hanging around just below that. And you can see that they're...
Silence that blasted coughing!
Apologize about the cough. You can see that there just aren't that many rivalries then between these elite top-of-the-line programs. Auburn-Alabama is a great rivalry, but Auburn is not an elite program. They're a good program, but it's a little brother rivalry, like USC-UCLA. That doesn't count. Texas-Oklahoma is a rivalry between two great programs. And obviously Michigan and Ohio State is. But the thing about those rivalries is they're regional games. And while they see a huge amount of differences between them and their rival, from the outside, it's hard to figure out what those differences are. Ohio State and Michigan, is there a huge difference between those two states? I mean, you're talking about similar cultures, similar parts of the country. The same with Texas and Oklahoma. And I know that the Texas people around me here are going to yell at me for that, but I don't care. I mean, Texas is bigger, but you cross the state line, it doesn't look that much different. Only USC and Notre Dame have two elite programs with a history of excellence. And let's be honest, probably a combined history of excellence that exceeds anybody else. More national titles, more Heisman trophies than Ohio State and Michigan or Oklahoma and Texas. And this is the only rivalry you have two great programs that really don't have a whole lot in common. I mean, you have this huge distance between the two of them. The schools themselves are very different. Notre Dame is small, Midwestern Catholic. USC is in Los Angeles, the entertainment capital of the world. It's more cosmopolitan. It's much larger. It's farmland against the West Coast. It's Hollywood against blue collar. It's beautiful LA women versus women that look like the Notre Dame mascot. And I'm sorry, Notre Dame women, for saying that. It's important to be honest here. And I realized that Notre Dame didn't even have women on campus until 1972. It was an all-men's school. I don't know how many of you know that. Obviously now they do admit women, although my understanding of the rule is that those women still have to look like men. So these are two very different programs. And and they also have this weird habit, both of them, of being their own worst enemies, because these are programs that have been good over a long period of time in many different eras, but also programs that have done a whole lot to self-sabotage themselves. I mean, we know what USC has done with its, hiring Paul Hackett, hiring Clay Helton, keeping Clay Helton around for as long as they did. I mean, Notre Dame is just as bad at that. Notre Dame once hired a high school coach to come in and run its program. It hired another guy that looks like he had eaten some high school coaches. I mean, that's one of the weird things about this rivalry is these are two programs that have been great for many, many years, but also two programs that find a way to screw up so often. That makes a game like this year's game a lot better, because it is better when both programs are good and there's a lot on the line. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Here's the thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about why this rivalry means so much to me. People of my generation see the Notre Dame game differently than almost any other generation of USC football fans. I mean, my dad grew up watching the games in the 60s and the 70s. He obviously saw some heartbreaking losses, but he saw a lot of amazing USC wins and a lot of success. The people that came after me, the people that grew up in the Pete Carroll years, all they saw was USC beating on Notre Dame like a helpless seal. And and it's the people of my generation that had a completely different experience, and it changed the way we look at this thing, I think, forever. I became a USC football fan in 1984. I watched some of the games with my dad before that on television, but it was 1984 that we moved back to Southern California, and I first attended a game at the Coliseum. And if you know anything about the history of USC Notre Dame, you know that starting as a USC football fan in 1984 was not a good thing. I had turned 11 that year. It wasn't until my second year of law school that I actually saw USC beat Notre Dame. That is a long time, a long, painful era it was. And I got to tell you, some of those games were downright horrific, particularly in the 80s. The first USC Notre Dame game I attended was 1986. That was not a particularly good Notre Dame team. It wasn't a great USC team for that matter, but USC had a better record than the Irish. USC led by 17 points going into the fourth quarter and found a way to lose the game. I say found a way to lose the game, but it's also correct to say that the officials helped that. I remember Rodney Peete had a quarterback sneak, which looked like it was a sure first down. They got a terrible spot, and that really made the difference in the game. That would have iced it. But USC also killed themselves. They give up a long punt return to Tim Brown at the end of the game, and they blow a 17-point lead and lose by 1. That is not a good way to start your USC Notre Dame viewing. That was unbelievably painful. It was only going to get worse. I mean, 2 years later, 1988, number 1 against number 2. That was a great USC team, a great USC team. They had just beaten Troy Aikman and the Bruins at the Rose Bowl. They're ranked number 2 in the country. They had, Tim Ryan and Don Gibson and Dan Owens. They had Junior Seau. They had Scott Ross, Rodney Peete. That was a great, Mark Carrier, Cleveland Coulter. That was a great USC football team that turned in just a horrific performance where they were dropping the ball all over the place and got blown out in a game where Notre Dame could barely move the ball. Go look at the stats. Notre Dame had probably 200 yards. Just terrible. Just terrible. 1989 might have been worse. Todd Marinovich and USC go to South Bend. There's a huge fight in the tunnel to start the game. Trojans are up 17-7 at a half and find a way to lose. Just gut punches these games. And so when USC finally beat the Irish in 1996, it was a lousy USC football team. They were 5-6 going into the game. They had absolutely collapsed the week before against UCLA. And a lot of things had to go right for them to win. Notre Dame had to miss an extra point to keep USC within 8 so they could score, go for 2, and send it in overtime. And, of course, Mark Cusano bats down the Notre Dame pass, and that's a difference in the game. And despite the fact that it wasn't a particularly good USC team, and it was only a decent Notre Dame team. I think they were 8-2 and ranked in the top 10, but they weren't great. That will go down as one of my 5 favorite USC games, no matter how many more I watch. It was just such an unbelievable relief to finally beat those guys, to actually see USC beat Notre Dame. I had never seen it. I'd been a fan forever. I had never seen it. And the Coliseum went absolutely nuts that day. It was a great day. We've obviously had some good days since then. I mean, when Pete Carroll came along, he just thrashed Notre Dame pretty consistently. We had the Bush Push, best sporting event I've ever attended. We had consecutive 31-point beatdowns. We had a 38-0 shutout of the Irish in South Bend. We had a game at the Coliseum in 2008 where Notre Dame didn't get a first down until the fourth quarter, and then we cheered for them. So obviously over the years, USC has had their runs as well. And I had sort of an interesting experience in one of those later Pete Carroll games at the Coliseum. I'm standing in line for food, and an Irish fan starts talking to me about the game, basically says, man, I'm not looking forward to this. I have a feeling we're going to get steamrolled today. And I told him, I said, yeah, maybe. I think we're better, but I got to be honest. I don't, after my history of watching USC Notre Dame, I never take a win over the Irish for granted. Never. And he looked at me sort of quizzically and he said, I don't think you get it. This place is a house of horrors for us. And he started to go through all of the experiences that had been so devastating for him and Notre Dame fans of his generation. Talking about the comeback in 1974. You're talking about Fertig to Sherman. You're talking about some games where Notre Dame's heart was ripped out. And as he was talking about these games, I could tell that he had the same sort of PTSD that I had had because of his experiences. And it occurred to me that's how you know what a great rivalry is when you have two fan bases with very long memories, both of them can't get out of their minds the horrible things that have happened to them by the other team over the years. And, for some reason, those losses hurt more than the wins feel good. Some of those games you never get over. USC Notre Dame is the greatest rivalry in college football. It's 2 programs with double-digit national titles, each with 7 Heisman Trophy winners. All kinds of first-round draft choices and All-Americans, some of the greatest games that have ever been played between those 2 programs. I love this rivalry. If you're a young USC fan and you've never been to the Coliseum to watch USC and Notre Dame in person, get your tickets. I think there's still a few hundred left. Go see this game. You need to see it. I try to never miss it. Whether it's in LA or South Bend, I try to make it every single year. It's amazing. My favorite game of the year. So let's talk about what's going to happen this year, because I think this is going to be pretty special. I said earlier that this game is always better when there's a lot on the line, and there is a huge amount on the line, really for both teams. I mean, Marcus Freeman had a really rough start to this season. To turn it around and beat Clemson and beat USC and finish 9-3 would really show that his program is on the upswing. USC, of course, has even more to play for. USC has a legitimate chance of being in the college football playoff. In fact, I'll tell you, if they win their next 2 games, they're almost certainly going to get in. For the first time since this playoff has been around. It would be an unbelievable accomplishment for Lincoln Riley in his first year to go from 4-8 to the college football playoff. It really doesn't matter what happens in that playoff. That is a sign that this program is once again elite. That's a big deal. That's a lot to play for. It's also going to be an enormous crowd. I'm not just talking about the game. I think the game will be sold out, but I'm talking about having on rivalry weekend really the evening primetime game all to yourself. There is no competition here. It's going to be on ABC. The ratings are going to be enormous. Everybody's going to be watching this game. USC-Notre Dame is too special a rivalry, and the stakes are just too high for people to turn away. And what that means is that USC has a chance to add statue number 8. And I really think that's what's going to happen. Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams has a chance to do what Carson Palmer did 20 years ago. Take on a pretty good Notre Dame defense at the Coliseum in front of an enormous viewing audience and humiliate them and win the Heisman. And I think that's what he's going to do. Notre Dame has a good defense. They have a pass rusher that's fantastic. They're pretty physical. They've done a good job in most of their games this year. And they're going to be ready to play, and they're going to play hard. But here's the thing. Caleb Williams is the best football player in the country. And if you've been watching USC play this year, I think you probably are starting to realize that. It's not just that he's good. I knew he was good when he came over from Oklahoma. I had watched him play last year. I knew he was fast. I knew he had a strong arm. I knew he was a playmaker. What I didn't realize is just how gifted this guy is. He's the most talented quarterback in the country, the most talented quarterback USC's ever had. And I know he's just a true sophomore, and he's going to continue to get better. He hasn't reached his peak. But right now, he's the most dangerous player in college football. It's almost impossible to bring the guy down. If you get an unblocked guy one-on-one, you're not going to get him. And his arm talent is outrageous. The pass that he made against UCLA where he was sprinting to his left, threw across his body, and threw a dart into a small window. I said it the other day on the Inside the Trojans Huddle show. That's a throw that only 4 people in the world can make. And Josh Allen can make that throw. Patrick Mahomes can make that throw. Aaron Rodgers can make that throw. And so can Caleb Williams. And I think that's it. I mean, you're talking about not just NFL talent, you're talking about elite NFL talent. This is a guy who's probably going to go number 1 overall and is going to be a franchise quarterback and is going to play for a long time. He's that good. So I know I know Notre Dame has a pretty good defensive team, and I know they're going to be keen on him. But the reality is, when Caleb Williams is on, and I think at this point in the season he is, I don't think there's anybody that can stop him, and Notre Dame's not going to do it. Caleb Williams is going to throw for 400 yards. He's going to put on a gigantic show in front of a gigantic audience, and he's going to finish up as USC's 8th Heisman Trophy winner, and amazingly Lincoln Riley's 3rd in 6 years. And I think at the end of this thing, USC is going to set themselves up perfectly to get into the playoff. And I got to tell you, I can think of nothing that I'm going to enjoy more than standing there in the Coliseum, listening to Conquest, watching the Notre Dame fans file out, sad and dejected yet again, as Caleb Williams leads the band and USC gets ready to go to the conference championship game and punch their ticket to the college football playoff. I can't wait. I don't like Notre Dame. I don't know how you could grow up a USC fan and like Notre Dame. And you certainly can't grow up a USC fan that went through that horrible streak and like Notre Dame. I don't like that mascot. I don't like the here come the Irish chants. I hate that. I hate all kinds of things about that program, but I respect that program a great deal, and I can't wait to watch those two teams play on Saturday. So listen, I'm hopeful that I'll get my Notre Dame legends back on the show here, maybe this coming week, who knows. I apologize for my screw-up, and all I can say is this is going to be a great week. Get out to the Coliseum, make it loud, and let's enjoy this one. Fight on, SC.